Nia Harris had spent years perfecting her craft as a nurse, never expecting her hard work and professionalism to be met with humiliation in front of someone as influential as Elon Musk. But on that fateful day, the arrogant Dr. Robert Hayes did the unthinkable. He belittled her in front of the billionaire tech mogul. What he didn't know was that this moment would set in motion a chain of events that would change both their lives forever. Nia Harris was a woman who had always carried herself with quiet strength. As a black nurse at one of the most prestigious hospitals in Silicon Valley, Nia had faced countless challenges. While her colleagues admired her skill and bedside manner, the same couldn't be said for those in positions of power. Dr. Robert Hayes, a well-known and well-respected surgeon, was particularly disdainful of her presence. At 32, Nia had already built a reputation for being an exceptional nurse. She had a sharp eye for detail, a calm demeanor under pressure, and a genuine compassion that made her beloved by her patients. But despite her talents, the subtle and not so subtle racism she faced in her daily interactions began to wear on her. She often found herself overlooked for promotions, passed over for projects, and silently dismissed when her ideas were brought up in meetings. The staff at the hospital may have prided themselves on their diverse and inclusive culture, but beneath the polished surface, racism was alive and well. And Dr. Hayes was one of its most vocal proponents. He didn't even try to hide it. "Do you really think you should be handling this, Naya?" Dr. Hayes once said during a particularly tense surgical shift, his tone dripping with condescension as he directed her to assist in prepping for a complicated procedure. Maybe someone with a bit more experience in these kinds of things should be in charge. It wasn't an isolated incident. Over the past few years, Dr. Hayes had taken every opportunity to remind Nisha of her place, often questioning her competence in front of her colleagues. But she never let it get to her, or at least not in front of others. In private, Nia would let her frustrations fester, finding solace in her quiet apartment at the end of each long shift. She had worked too hard to let one man's bigotry ruin her career. Still, as time went on, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was slowly being cornered, pushed into a position where no matter how hard she worked, she would always be judged by the color of her skin rather than the quality of her work. Then the invitation came, the invitation that would alter everything. The hospital was buzzing with excitement. Elon Musk, the enigmatic billionaire, was coming to town for a high-profile partnership meeting. The event was scheduled to take place in the Grand Atrium, a sleek and modern space that overlooked the sprawling city. Staff members were scrambling to ensure everything was perfect for his arrival, knowing that the tech mogul's presence could bring tremendous opportunities to the hospital and its cutting-edge initiatives. Nia had been selected to help manage the event. Though it felt more like a token gesture than anything else, the decision wasn't made because she was the best person for the job. It was because she had proven herself in the past to be reliable, and someone would need to keep things running smoothly in the background. At first, Nia was thrilled. The chance to interact with Musk and be part of such a momentous event was a rare opportunity. But as the day approached, she began to feel a familiar unease creeping in. It wasn't just the pressure of handling a high-profile event. No, this time it was the tension between her and Dr. Hayes that gnawed at her. He had already made it clear that he didn't think she belonged in a position like this, and now, with Elon Musk set to make an appearance, Nia couldn't help but feel like she was walking a fine line between doing her job and enduring more subtle forms of degradation. The day of the event arrived, and Nia's nerves were on edge. She dressed in her best professional attire, a smart black dress paired with a tailored blazer. She had put extra thought into her appearance that morning, wanting to ensure that she looked competent and professional. However, no matter how much she tried to present herself with confidence, the internal voice of doubt wouldn't let up. She couldn't shake the feeling that no matter what she did, it would never be enough for some people. When she entered the hospital's grand atrium that afternoon, the scene was nothing short of extravagant. The space was filled with sleek glass panels and modern art sculptures, the floor polished to perfection. Catering staff bustled about, adjusting trays of hors d'oeuvres, and the sound of murmured conversations filled the air. In the center of it all stood Dr. Hayes, speaking animatedly with several influential figures, including a few of the hospital's top administrators. But it was when Elon Musk entered the room that everything truly shifted. Nia's heart raced as she saw Musk walk into the room, flanked by his bodyguards and a handful of advisors. He had a commanding presence, exuding confidence and curiosity. His arrival seemed to cast a sudden shadow over the room as everyone immediately turned their attention to him, eager to make a good impression. As Nia helped coordinate the flow of the event, her role became increasingly prominent. She was responsible for ensuring that Musk was introduced to key individuals, making sure the timeline of events was followed precisely, and handling any last-minute logistics. But Dr. Hayes, who had been observing from the sidelines, took it as an opportunity to assert his authority. Nia had just finished giving a brief tour of the hospital's new research wing to a group of potential investors when she returned to the atrium. She was caught off guard by Dr. Hayes, who was standing near Musk and speaking with a sense of grandeur. When Nia approached, he beckoned her over with a wave, as if summoning a servant. "Nia, there you are," he said loudly, his voice cutting through the murmur of the room. "I need you to help move this conversation along. We don't want to waste Mr. Musk's time, do we?" There was something in the way he said it, the dismissive tone, that made her stomach churn. It was the same tone he had used countless times to undermine her, but this time it felt different, more public, more demeaning. "Of course, Dr. Hayes," Nia said with a tight smile, trying her best to hide the tension that was building inside of her. She stepped forward to assist, but before she could say another word, Dr. Hayes continued. "Actually," he said, his eyes gleaming with a strange satisfaction, "maybe you should just step aside for a moment. We're having an important conversation here, and I'm sure Mr. Musk would appreciate someone a little more experienced handling the details." The words hung in the air, heavy and humiliating. Musk's gaze shifted slightly toward Nia, but he didn't say anything. He didn't even acknowledge her. Instead, he nodded politely as Dr. Hayes continued to speak. "I mean, no offense," Dr. Hayes added with a mocking smile, "but I don't think you're quite the right person for the job." The room fell into a tense silence, and Nia felt as though the world had narrowed to the space between her and Dr. Hayes. Her cheeks burned with embarrassment, and she struggled to keep her composure. She wasn't sure what hurt more, the public nature of the insult, or the fact that Musk, the very person she had hoped to impress, had seen the entire exchange. But she refused to let Dr. Hayes see her weakness. Nia straightened her back, looked him squarely in the eye, and replied, "I'll make sure everything is handled. Don't worry, Dr. Hayes." With that, she stepped away from the conversation, retreating into the shadows where she could catch her breath. Though she hadn't shown it outwardly, Nia's mind raced. She had been humiliated in front of Elon Musk, in front of everyone in the room. The shame was unbearable, but she knew she had no choice but to continue with the event. As the night wore on, she held her head high, going through the motions, smiling politely, and doing what she was expected to do. But inside, a fire had been lit, one that would change everything. Though the humiliation from the day before stung like an open wound, Nia Harris was no stranger to adversity. She had spent her entire career fighting to be seen for her talent, not the color of her skin. And she wasn't about to let Dr. Hayes' condescending behavior ruin her day or her career. On the surface, she maintained her composure, working efficiently and professionally, all the while steeling herself for the inevitable moment when she would break down. But that moment never came. As the hours passed and the event wound to a close, Nia focused solely on ensuring everything ran smoothly. She made sure the event ended without any major hiccups, escorted key figures out, and double-checked the logistics. Elon Musk was still in the building, mingling with a handful of important figures, but Nia kept her distance. The sting of his earlier indifference still lingered in her chest, and she couldn't bring herself to engage him in conversation, not after the way Dr. Hayes had treated her. It wasn't until later that night, alone in her apartment, that the weight of the day truly hit her. The exhaustion from the event was nothing compared to the emotional toll it had taken. She sat on her couch, replaying the events of the day in her head, and each time the humiliation grew more vivid. Why did he treat me like that? Nia had become so accustomed to enduring microaggressions and subtle forms of discrimination that she had learned to brush them off. But yesterday had been different. It was public, intentional, and cruel. Dr. Hayes had openly dismissed her in front of someone as influential as Elon Musk, a man whose power could open doors for people like her, people of color. Yet there she was, standing on the sidelines, nothing more than an invisible worker in his eyes. How much longer can I take this? The question echoed in her mind as she stared blankly at the TV, the room quiet except for the hum of the air conditioning. For a moment, she considered what it might be like to leave the hospital. There were plenty of opportunities out there, but then the reality of the healthcare industry came crashing down on her. No matter where I go, it'll be the same. The discrimination, the obstacles, the glass ceiling. Nia didn't know how much longer she could keep pushing forward under such conditions. She had given everything to her career, but was it all for nothing? Was this just her lot in life, to be underestimated and overlooked no matter how hard she worked? The next morning, the shock of the previous day still hung over Nia like a dark cloud. She rose early as she always did and prepared herself for another long day at the hospital. Despite the turmoil within, she did her best to mask it. A fresh coat of makeup, a crisp white lab coat. She looked the part of a professional even if her heart was heavy. As Nia entered the hospital, a small part of her braced herself for the cold stares or whispered remarks that she knew would be waiting for her. She couldn't avoid Dr. Hayes forever, but as she passed through the bustling hallways, it was a different sight that stopped her in her tracks. A strange email had arrived in her inbox. At first, Nia thought it was spam, some random corporate solicitation or marketing attempt, but as she scanned the subject line, her breath caught in her throat. Invitation for a meeting. Elon Musk's healthcare initiative. It couldn't be real. Elon Musk? Here? To meet with her? Her fingers hovered over the mouse, as if afraid that clicking it would reveal some cruel joke. The email appeared legitimate, but the sheer idea of it seemed impossible. Her mind raced through every scenario, none of which made any sense. Why would Elon Musk want to meet with her? What did she have to offer him? After a moment of hesitation, Nia clicked the email open. The body of the message was straightforward. Dear Nia Harris, we would like to extend an invitation to you for a private meeting with Mr. Elon Musk and his team to discuss an exciting new healthcare initiative. Please report to the designated location at 10 a.m. for this important opportunity. Details regarding the meeting will be provided in person. Looking forward to seeing you there. Best regards, Elon Musk's healthcare division. Nia blinked at the screen, trying to process the words. It felt like a dream. No, a mistake. She quickly checked the email's sender, and the address appeared to be legitimate. But this couldn't be real. She had barely spoken to Musk, let alone done anything significant to warrant a meeting with him. Could this be a mistake? Maybe they had the wrong person. When Nia arrived at the location specified in the email, her heart was pounding. She was early as usual, but the room was already set up for the meeting. It was a small conference room, sleek and minimalistic. A large oval table sat in the middle, with several high-backed chairs around it. Nia stood in the doorway, unsure if she was in the right place. Then she saw him. Elon Musk was sitting at the head of the table, flanked by a group of his top advisors. They were all wearing sharp suits, their demeanor cool and professional. Nia felt the stark contrast between herself, dressed in a simple blouse and slacks, and the polished executive sitting before her. She had no idea what was happening, but she felt a sudden wave of insecurity wash over her. Miss Harris, Musk said, looking up as she entered. His voice was calm, direct, but there was a warmth to it that made her feel oddly at ease, despite the shock of the situation. Yes, Mr. Musk? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Please have a seat, he said, gesturing to the chair opposite him. We're all very glad you could make it. Nia slowly sat down, trying to keep her emotions in check. She felt like an imposter. What did they want with her? Why her? As she sat, Musk wasted no time getting to the point. I'll be blunt. I saw what happened yesterday. I was there at the event and I watched how you handled everything. Not just the logistical challenges, but the way you conducted yourself in the face of... He paused, looking at his team for a moment. Well, let's just say less than professional behavior. Nia's heart skipped a beat. He had seen everything? I'm well aware of the kind of environment you've been working in, the way some people, like Dr. Hayes, have treated you. Musk's voice turned sharper for a moment, and Nia could see the frustration in his eyes. It's something I've encountered before in my own career. People who try to hold you back because of the color of your skin or your gender. It's wrong, and it needs to change. Nia could barely keep up with the flurry of emotions running through her. Musk was acknowledging her struggles. He wasn't just another rich white man oblivious to her pain. He had seen her for who she truly was. I've been looking to expand into healthcare, Musk continued, his tone shifting from frustration to determination. And after watching you yesterday, I believe you're the person I've been searching for. You have the intelligence, the resilience, and the leadership qualities to help lead an initiative that could revolutionize the industry. Nia felt her jaw drop as the words sank in. Lead an initiative? I'm offering you a position to head up a new project I'm starting, something groundbreaking. You'll be in charge of overseeing the healthcare initiative, the new hospital, and the technology integration. And I'm not just offering you a position, Musk added, his eyes locking onto hers. I'm offering you a significant stake in the company. You'll have real power in this. Nia's mind went blank. This couldn't be real. Was she dreaming? She had spent years fighting to be seen in a field that often dismissed her, and now here was Elon Musk, offering her a chance to change the course of her life entirely. News of Nia's new role spread like wildfire through the hospital. Her colleagues were stunned, unable to wrap their minds around the fact that the same woman they had so easily dismissed was now in a position of immense power, and none more so than Dr. Robert Hayes, who had treated her with such disdain. He found out the news the hard way when he walked into the hospital's break room, only to be greeted by whispers and shocked glances. It wasn't long before someone pulled him aside and informed him of the stunning development. Nia Harris, the nurse he had so callously humiliated, was now a key player in one of the most exciting new ventures in the healthcare industry. He froze, his face draining of color as the full weight of his actions hit him. The woman he had underestimated had just become someone he could no longer ignore. Nia Harris was no longer the quiet nurse who had been dismissed by Dr. Hayes. She was now a force to be reckoned with. Her rise to power was swift, but it wasn't just a lucky break. It was the result of years of perseverance, skill, and a deep well of untapped potential that had been buried under layers of systemic discrimination. When Elon Musk offered her the leadership role, Nia didn't hesitate. She accepted the challenge with a quiet confidence that had always been there, waiting for the right moment to be unleashed. She understood the responsibility that came with her new position. It wasn't just about the prestige, the power, or the financial gain. It was about change, real change, the kind of change that could reshape not only the hospital she had worked at, but the entire healthcare system. Her first days on the job were a whirlwind of meetings, strategy sessions, and introductions to high-level executives from various sectors of Musk's expansive empire. But Nia wasn't intimidated by the big names or the high-stakes atmosphere. She had already proven herself in a far more hostile environment, working in an institution that had constantly belittled her and failed to see her worth. This new role was just another battle to win, and she was ready. It didn't take long for Nia's leadership to start making an impact. She immediately set to work on rethinking the hospital's policies, not just in terms of patient care, but also in regard to its internal culture. Her efforts to introduce diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives were met with initial resistance, but Nia was prepared for that. She had learned long ago that real change doesn't come easily. She began by establishing clear metrics for measuring diversity and inclusion, not just in hiring practices, but in leadership positions, promotions, and career development. She pushed for comprehensive anti-racism training for all staff, including senior physicians like Dr. Hayes, who had once treated her with disdain. Nia's insistence on holding people accountable sent ripples through the hospital. The executives, who had once been indifferent to her, were now taking her seriously, and even those who had initially doubted her found themselves quietly impressed by her approach. But Nia wasn't content to just make noise. She was determined to ensure that real, lasting change took root. She worked with HR to overhaul the system of evaluating and promoting staff, demanding that leadership positions be filled with individuals who genuinely represented the diversity of the patients the hospital served. She used her platform to elevate the voices of those who had long been ignored or marginalized. Nurses, support staff, and underrepresented physicians now found themselves with new opportunities and resources. Nia was no longer just a part of the system. She was dismantling it and rebuilding it in a way that reflected the values of fairness, respect, and equality. Her impact was felt far beyond the hospital's walls. News of the changes she was spearheading spread throughout the medical community and beyond, sparking conversations about diversity and inclusion in healthcare on a global scale. Medical journals began to write about her initiatives, and business leaders took note of her success. What was once a humble hospital was now seen as a model for progressive change in the healthcare industry, and Nia Harris was the visionary behind it all. In the face of all this success, however, one person was not thrilled by the new direction the hospital was taking: Dr. Robert Hayes. Dr. Hayes had long considered himself the untouchable king of the hospital's medical staff. His arrogance had made him blind to the changes taking place around him, and he hadn't taken Nia's promotion seriously, at least not at first. He assumed she would be swallowed up by the bureaucracy, just another executive who would be content with overseeing the day-to-day operations and who would never truly challenge the established order. But Nia was no ordinary executive. She was a force of nature. At first, Dr. Hayes dismissed her efforts to improve the institution's culture, thinking they were nothing more than empty words. He snickered at her diversity initiatives and made snide remarks about her efforts to fix the system. But as time went on, the changes she was implementing became impossible to ignore. The hospital's staff was beginning to take Nia's vision seriously, and the patients, many of whom were people of color who had previously been underserved, were responding with gratitude. Even the hospital's financial performance began to improve, thanks to Nia's innovative approach to patient care and community outreach. That was when Dr. Hayes began to realize that he had underestimated her. His arrogance had blinded him to the potential threat she posed to his career. It started with small things. The executive board, which had once praised Dr. Hayes for his long-standing reputation, began to give him the cold shoulder. Colleagues he had once considered allies began to distance themselves from him. There were no more friendly lunches or casual chats in the hallways. In the meantime, Nia's rise continued, and the whispers in the hospital corridors were not about her flaws, but about her ability to get things done, to shake up an industry that had long been resistant to change. Dr. Hayes watched in disbelief as the hospital he once dominated shifted under his feet. People who had once idolized him now sought Nia's advice, and his influence began to wane. His reputation, which had once been untouchable, was now being questioned in medical circles. Was he really the expert he claimed to be, or was he just another product of an old system that was finally being exposed for its flaws? It didn't take long for the situation to escalate. Dr. Hayes found himself sidelined, quietly pushed out of the leadership position he had once held so tightly. His prestigious role was now being filled by someone who had a genuine vision for the future, someone who had the nerve to challenge the status quo. Slowly but surely, the connections that had once supported Dr. Hayes began to unravel. Hospitals, medical organizations, and even businesses started pulling away from him. His credibility was shot, and no one was interested in aligning with a man who had once made it clear that people like Nia were beneath him. Dr. Hayes' downfall was a slow, painful process, but it was inevitable. Nia's influence and success made his discriminatory behavior impossible to ignore, and the institutions that had once sheltered him now saw him as a liability. He was quietly stripped of his title, his access to high-level projects revoked, and his position within the hospital reduced to something unrecognizable. As the months passed, Dr. Hayes found himself struggling to regain the respect he had lost. His old connections had dried up, and his reputation was now a punchline. He had burned too many bridges, alienated too many people, and now the consequences of his actions were coming home to roost. It was during a high-level meeting that the final moment of poetic justice arrived. The hospital's new initiatives had drawn a great deal of attention, and the board had scheduled a major review of its progress. Dr. Hayes was still on the invite list, though no one could understand why. The real power in the room now belonged to Nia, and as the meeting progressed, it became clear that Dr. Hayes' days were numbered. At one point, Nia stood to give her presentation, outlining the progress the hospital had made under her leadership. Her calm, confident demeanor filled the room as she spoke about the changes she had implemented and the successes they had achieved. She was no longer the young, struggling nurse trying to prove her worth. She was an executive with a clear vision, and her success spoke for itself. Dr. Hayes, who had once treated her with such contempt, sat silently in the back of the room. His face was a mask of bitterness and regret. The contrast between Nia's calm confidence and his deflated ego was impossible to miss. As the meeting came to a close, Nia caught Dr. Hayes' eye. There was no need for words. The irony of the situation was clear to both of them. The man who had once humiliated her was now sitting in the back, a shadow of his former self, while she stood at the forefront of the institution, leading it into a new era. Nia's heart swelled with quiet satisfaction. This was the payback, not just for her, but for everyone who had ever been overlooked, underestimated, or mistreated. Dr. Hayes had lost everything because of his own arrogance, and Nia had gained everything because of her resilience, intelligence, and determination.